As Franklin Roosevelt began his second term, his overconfidence had caused a backlash in Congress. FDR's magic touch seemed to have worn off.
It's only when the Second World War comes and he can sort of reconstitute himself as the leader of the people in a time of crisis that his presidency picks up steam again.
As early as 1937, FDR saw war on the horizon. He worked to convince isolationist Americans that they might someday need to get involved.
America hates war.
What's interesting is to watch him sort of be half step, full step, ahead of the population. He saw the war coming long before most Americans did.
Yes, we are determined to keep out of war. Yet we cannot insure ourselves against the disastrous effects of war and the dangers of involvement.
In the summer of 1940, France fell to the Nazis. The Battle of Britain began. That November, FDR broke a precedent set by George Washington when he became the first American president to be elected for a third term.
The scale and the nature of World War II made it, I suppose, all but inevitable that he would continue in this innovative way and in 1940 run for a third term and in 1944 run for a fourth term.
Throughout 1940 and 41, FDR found ways to aid the Allies while remaining officially neutral. But the days of neutrality were about to end.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
If not for his last-minute scribbling, Roosevelt might have used the less memorable phrase, a date which will live in world history. Pearl Harbor heralded the beginning of FDR's new role as a war president.
He was a superb war president, intimately involved in the complicated diplomacy of the war years.
I would argue that the greatest accomplishment of Roosevelt during World War II were the commanding officers he picked, people like George Marshall, Nimitz. You know, these are the great names of World War II, yet Roosevelt was their boss.
Succumbing to anti-Japanese hysteria, FDR ordered the internment of more than 100,000 Japanese Americans on February 19, 1942.
Their feeling was that the western United States in particular was filled with Japanese Americans and that they couldn't fully be trusted. It's probably a low moment of the Roosevelt administration, and most historians have been quite critical of it.
Roosevelt has also been criticized for his failure to respond to the plight of European Jews, who were facing extermination under Hitler's final solution. The White House knew about the Nazi concentration camps as early as November 1942, yet Roosevelt made no extraordinary effort to help Jewish refugees.
It sounds callous, but he probably considered what was happening to European Jews not of the first importance in his agenda.
Roosevelt was always very clear on this. He felt that the most important thing he could do was to win the war, and that was going to help those who were in Hitler's concentration camps the most.
For Roosevelt, winning the war meant launching a massive assault on mainland Europe, D-Day.
Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity.
It was the greatest logistic effort ever conceived, and Franklin Roosevelt deserves credit for it almost in its entirety.
5 months after D-Day, Roosevelt was re-elected to a fourth term, but he was 62 years old and his health was failing.
It's humanly understandable, I suppose, why anybody who had served 3 terms as president, presided over this war effort to this point in late 1944, wanted to stay on board long enough to see the thing through to conclusion. But in some ways, I think it was an irresponsible act. I think he should probably would have been better advised to step aside at that point and let a more capable leader play the end game.
The end game of the war took place at Yalta in February 1945 with a meeting of the Allies to discuss the shape of the new world order. Here, FDR fulfilled the vision of Woodrow Wilson when he and Churchill convinced Stalin to sign off on the plan for an international peacekeeping organization, the United Nations. On April 12, 1945, Franklin Delano Roosevelt died of a cerebral hemorrhage, bringing an end to the longest and one of the greatest presidencies in American history.
To be ranked as a great president, you almost surely need some kind of crisis that you have to deal with. Roosevelt got handed not one but two crises of enormous proportions.
He had the Depression in the 1930s, and he had a global war in the 1940s. And what is so unique about him is that he had the personal and political tools to excel in both of those crisis situations.
I think the presidency of Franklin Roosevelt changed the presidency more than any other single presidency did in terms of the kinds of policies and actions that the government would now be willing to undertake, and it also changed it in the way in which it made the president himself a titanic figure in the mind of the nation in a way that it had never been before.
With his unusual alchemy of charm and arrogance, improvisation and political cunning, FDR changed the very idea of what it meant to be President of the United States. All future presidents would have to reckon with his legacy.